Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 637 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our ninth book just came out. It's called From Letters to Leaders, The Legacy of Service. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, my wife and I, we like to go on hikes locally here in Tennessee or when we visit friends in Colorado, but nothing has ever happened to us quite like the event that happened to our next guest. Scott Courtright is a state archaeologist at USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and he's also a brother of Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity from Northern Arizona University. The most unique thing about Scott is that he was struck by lightning on a hike and he survived to tell the story. He is here to tell us all about it. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. I am so excited that we got introduced by one of your fraternity brothers at Northern Arizona, who actually works for the University at Buffalo, which of course is my alma mater. We got here, and I'm just so pumped to tell this story because I've never spoken to anybody who's actually been struck by lightning. And I'm like, I'm so curious about that. Before we even get to that story, you went to Northern Arizona for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why did you choose Northern Arizona?
A couple of reasons. I grew up in Phoenix.
Mhm.
When I graduated from high school, I did not want to stay in Phoenix. I want to get out of the big city. And I lived up in Sedona, which is south of Flagstaff, when I was a child. And so my parents were also alumni, and so they also had a great anthropology program. So everything kind of came together, and it was just close enough, but just far enough from home where I felt like I was getting away, and it was just I wanted to be in a mountain town and a smaller university, and that's how I chose NAU.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I went through a similar thing in New York, growing up around New York City, wanted to get to a different town, a little bit further away from the parents, so that way they would actually have to call me if they wanted to come and visit. So
Right.
that makes total sense to me. And Sedona, by the way, is absolutely stunning. I mean, that place is just remarkable. If you've never been to Sedona, like put that on your list because you're going to see things that you've never seen before in your life. And it's just so unique, so incredible, so awe-inspiring to be
hmm
there. You definitely have to go and check that out. Now,
Yep.
you joined Phi Sigma Kappa at Northern Arizona. I'm wondering what made you join this group of guys over other organizations on campus?
Well, kind of funny how that story kind of evolved is we were freshmen and we were looking for things to do. And I ran into a couple of guys that I knew from high school that were in Phi Sigma Kappa. And they invited us to come and hang out with them. And that's how it all started and that's how it all ended. I did not look at any other houses. The group of guys at Phi Sig were people that I wanted to be with, wanted to spend time with. We all had similar interests. And there was really no decision to be made in terms of choosing other houses. I didn't look at one other house.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's very similar for me too. It's all based on the relationship. I think that
Mhm.
relationship that you had with the men that were already in that house was so strong, and that overrides basically everything else. And it's all about relationships. It has nothing to
Mhm.
do with, who throws the biggest party on campus or what have you. It's just a relationship, period, end of story. And I hope that that's a really strong message for all of our fraternity and sorority members who are listening to just focus on the relationship. It's nothing else other than that relationship. That's, people join people, and clearly you joined Phi Sig for those reasons. Now, you were literally struck by lightning while you were on a hike. Can you walk us through what happened to you that day and what you remember most vividly about that experience?
Wow. Yeah, no, it was a unique day for many reasons. So I work for the federal government, so I was on furlough. So we weren't working and I was looking for things to do. And so I decided I'm going to hike Humphreys again. And so Humphreys Peak is the tallest mountain in Arizona, 12,633 feet. And so I decided this Wednesday that was, coming up the next week, I'm like, I'm going to hike it that day. The weather looked decent. There was supposed to be weather rolling in uh, later in the afternoon. So I started hiking up a little after 7 a.m. in the morning. It's a nice day. Got to the summit a little bit after 10 o'clock. And by the time I got to the summit, the weather was starting to turn and starting to like grapple. It was windy. The thing is, when you're on the top of a mountain that high, the weather's never nice. If it's sunny, it's windy. If it's cloudy, it's windy. And so I got up to the top, and what I remember most was when I got up there, I had the top of the mountain to myself for probably 5 minutes. And one time prior, I had hiked up there. It was like Disneyland. It was in the summertime. There was 100 people up at the top. Everybody's waiting in line to take a picture. So I enjoyed my little moment of peace and solitude. I was brought a thermos and I was drinking coffee, and then two other hikers came up shortly afterwards. One guy got up there, jumped off real quick, and another guy from Canada came up, and he was like a trail runner. And we talked for a couple of minutes, and I offered to take his picture, and that's the last thing I remember. So I'd taken his picture, and what I'm gathering I had done is I'd gone back to my pack and I was getting ready to put it on, and I think I must have been kneeling down because the next thing I know, I woke up on the ground, completely paralyzed. My most vivid thought memory was coming out of this like really dark blackness, just undescribable. And the lightning had struck me in my right forearm. And I remember trying to pick up my right arm, and it was like a limp spaghetti noodle. And I thought I had broken it. I had no idea what had happened at all. And I was extremely confused. I had no idea what was going on. And so first thought was like, did like we get attacked by a bear? Like just didn't know what was going on. And then I looked over and I saw the Canadian guy. His name was John. He was probably no less than 5 feet away from me. He was on his back, and he took more of a direct hit than I did, or like a bigger strike, because it had essentially disintegrated almost all of his clothes. He was completely naked from the waist down, like because he had running shorts, and like the nylon just vaporized. And that kind of led to my further confusion, because I was like, okay, now what is going on now? Here I am on the top of this mountain, and there's this guy here who's partially clothed. And that was just the most surreal moment, because I couldn't move this whole time, and my brain was just scrambled, like trying to kind of process, and my systems were coming back online. It was a very long process. But a couple of minutes after that, so we were both unconscious for about 5 minutes. So I became conscious first, and then a few minutes later, John woke up, and I remember him just going, "Hello, is there anybody here? What happened?" Just over and over, and he couldn't move either. And I just remember telling him, "Hey, I think we were struck by lightning." And then at some point in that time, I called 911. It took me 9 minutes. My phone was in my pocket. So thankfully, I had the wherewithal to take my phone out, and I got a call out to 911. Um, I am looking at, the great thing about having cell phones is that you can kind of reconstruct events based on photographs, text messages, call logs. It took me like 7 or 8 attempts for a call to get through to 911. And when I did get a hold of them, I remember just telling them, like, I think we were struck by lightning. Um, they asked my phone number. They were able to ping my location. And I was on the phone with them for 9 minutes. I thought it was 30 seconds. After that, my phone didn't work for 3 hours.
Wow.
So there's a lot of just kind of laying around, and I've had a lot of time to look back on the day, and we were stuck on top of the mountain for over 3 hours, and I probably remember 15 minutes of those 3 hours. But what I do remember is that I realized that John was much worse off than I was, and so when I was able to move, it was a matter of getting John covered and stabilized. And when I think he was standing up when he got struck. So he just dropped like a sack of rocks, and he hit the back of his head on a rock. And so I thought he had a concussion, but he was unable to move for quite a long time. So I remember we were putting backpacks on top of him. I was giving him clothing. I was laying on top of him. We were doing everything we could because there was probably 30+ mile an hour winds and trying to snow the entire time we were up there. And so it was a progression of both of us becoming physically and mentally able to improve our situation. So there came a point where John was like, I think I can move. And so then we moved John, and there's this little rock wall sort of enclosure at the top. And then we put ourselves up against that to try to shelter ourselves from the wind. And so we did that for a while. And then, still trying to keep John warm because, he has nothing on his lower body. His jacket and his shirt was open in the front. It was just like a bear had just gone in and just torn up his clothing. Thankfully, he still had his sleeves on his jacket, but it was just literally a matter of keeping him warm. I was thankfully my clothes were 100% intact. They had holes in them here and there, but I was in much better situation than John was, and it was just to get it to the point where where John would and I would both get off the mountain, and so we were just hunkered down. We were sharing body warmth. We were doing everything you had to do to not get hypothermic up there.
Yeah. I mean, John was only 5 feet away from you when you were struck. So I'm wondering, have you ever thought about how close you were to not making it, whether it be from the lightning or from the cold weather or, hypothermia essentially? How did that awareness change your relationship with fear?
Yeah, there's so many variables. Some people are like, well, you shouldn't have been up there. But then part of me is like, well, if I wasn't up there or John wasn't up there and just one of us was struck individually, there's a good chance that it just would have been a fatality.
Right.
Um, so, with my, relationship for fear, I, I don't know if it's really changed it. I'm going to keep living life as I have. I will say that you kind of live each day like it could be your last. You kind of view it in a different lens where it's like, if I don't do this today, I might never have a chance to do it again. But in terms of like, being afraid of the mountain, I've gone up there, I've gone snowboarding since this has happened, and we have John and I have talked, and we do both want to hike to the top again. So, it's I think fear is it's a reasonable feeling to have, but for me personally, it's not a feeling or an emotion that I think that's going to really dictate my choices in life moving forward, unless there's really bad choices.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I definitely can see, being of the opinion that we got to do it today because we don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. I mean, you were struck by lightning, and you survived something that most people will never experience. So, has anything else shifted for you, either mentally or emotionally, other than just living life to its fullest every single day?
In a way, after the event, and I'll say this, which, after you're struck by lightning, you do a lot of internet research,
Hmm.
is that 90% of lightning strike victims survive, which I had no clue. I thought I was like some diamond in the rough that I'd survive this thing. But I think what makes my situation unique was the fact that we were stuck on top of the mountain for so long. Um, After the strike, I'm pretty sure I had PTSD. I knew that my head and what I had gone through, because like for the first 2 weeks, like I couldn't sleep well. It was the events would just play over and over and over again, and I had no hesitation about talking to a psychologist, talking to a therapist about it, because I knew that what I'd gone through was not a fun experience, and my body, the fact that I only remembered 15 minutes of 3 hours, it was a very unpleasant experience, and my body went through a lot of trauma, and so I had no problem with talking to someone, and I wouldn't hesitate to talk to someone about my mental health with this situation or any other situations moving forward, because it's a lot to process, and therapists are really good about helping you just kind of talk about it and get through it. It wasn't when I talked to the therapist, they weren't these really like deep sessions going into what happened. It was just talking about things. And that really, I think, helped me get over that hurdle and not have those, lingering memories and just replaying the events of that day over and over again.
Mm. You work in archaeology, and I find that field just completely fascinating. My dad was an archaeologist, and he grew up in Israel. So he was one of the original archaeologists that uncovered Masada in Israel. And it was just really cool to be able to go back to that site along with my dad and my children, and for him to give the tour of Masada from the person who actually did the
Wow.
original dig. And even the tour guides that were up on the mountain, they actually went along with us on the tour with my dad leading, because these were things that they weren't there for, so they had no knowledge of. And they just wanted to learn as much as possible as they could about the mountain and the early days of uncovering it. And what I learned from my father is that really archaeology is a field that requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of humility. It requires long-term thinking. And so, I'm wondering how surviving a lightning strike, does that reinforce or reshape those traits for you in archaeology?
I think it reinforces it, you know. I think a lot of the reasons for why I survived this experience have to do with my experiences and what I had to go through as an archaeologist over the last 30 years in terms of spending a lot of time outdoors. Um, but I think, I had a lot of time to think about, everything and, how I approach things. And I'll be honest and say that like after this, I think I have a little more carefree approach to a lot of things. With work, I have very high expectations for people that work for me, for, people I work with. And I think this event has kind of told me internally, like, you don't always have to be that way. There's different ways you can approach people. And, if you just kind of just take a step back and be like, well, they'll get it done. It may not be exactly how I want it done, or that's not the way I do it. But you know what? That's why they're doing it. I'm not in charge of doing that process. But I think I'm just kind of a little bit more laid back and a little more accepting of how things happen, especially when they're out of my control.
Yeah. You've been very open and honest about, your time with a psychologist, talking about the trauma that your body went through, the trauma that your mind went through, going through such an event. So for all the students, the college students who are listening, who feel a lot of pressure to always appear strong, especially the men who are listening or put together, what would you want them to understand about showing vulnerability?
It's fine to be vulnerable. We're human. It's we're dynamic, very complicated beings. And I think vulnerability is nothing to be ashamed of. There's obviously there's situations where you may not want to show vulnerability, but there's no shame in being vulnerable and talking with people and having other people help you get through situations. I think with vulnerability, a lot of times it just becomes an issue of you taking everything on yourself and not realizing or accepting the fact that there's other people out there that can help you get through a situation.
Yeah. That's really well said. I appreciate that perspective. I recently lost my dad, the archaeologist. He passed away over the holidays
Right.
in December, and luckily he actually wrote a book about all of his experiences as an archaeologist. And it's very, I mean, the guy has been to more places than anybody I know. He's gone to places that nobody gets to, like Easter Island, and
Oh, wow.
places that are just Madagascar. Just weird, strange places. And I often think about, legacy, right? When we're no longer on this planet, what are we leaving behind? And that question rolls through my mind quite often. And you've spent your career as an archaeologist preserving history, protecting cultural resources. So I'm wondering, how does surviving a near-death experience, how does that influence the way that you view your legacy?
Gosh, yeah, that's a really good question. I think, it just reinforces my desire to do my job in the best way possible, do it the right way every time. And and try to improve on the way I did it last time, if at all possible. You know, being an archaeologist in the federal government, legacy is at this stage in my career is so much is more so of, in my view, of setting up this program for this agency in a way that so when I do retire from archaeology, that there's a foundation for the next person to continue what I think is the way that this program should be run. And this is my view on how, this agency is going to preserve and work with people to protect cultural resources.
Yeah, really well done.
Probably
You know,
not book worthy, nothing like Madagascar or Easter Island. This is farms in Arizona right now.
yeah. Listen, he's gotten to places that nobody's gotten to, so I'm very jealous about that. There's no question. I also think about, your decision making. Obviously you got struck by lightning and a whole bunch of your memory is lost at that point. And then you have to make a whole bunch of quick decisions about John and his health and how we're going to keep him alive. So there's all these decisions that, you have to quickly start making in your mind, even though your mind is completely discombobulated. So you're trying to gather your own thoughts.
Yeah.
How should the college students who are listening think about decision making when the consequences aren't always visible at that moment?
Yeah, I think, for my situation, I think the reason why we were able to both survive off being struck on top of the mountain is that I'd prepared for the situation.
Hmm.
Um, there's always a risk, no matter what you're going to do. Climbing the mountain, I never would have thought I would have got struck by lightning. If I knew I was going to get struck by lightning that day, I would have stayed home.
Sure.
But there's many other things that could have happened. It could have broken my leg. I could have, getting stuck in the snow. I think, just when making these decisions, just kind of know that there's always going to be consequences to any decision and be prepared to deal with those consequences, be them good or bad. You never know what life's going to throw your way, and just kind of use your life experiences. I always just say, trust your gut. If your gut's telling you one thing, it's probably because your body is telling you that, based on this thing that happened in the past that you may not remember, this may not be a good idea. But I think, just trust yourself, and then also trust the people around you. They're your friends, they're your fraternity brothers and your sorority sisters for a reason, and give them the opportunity and the credit to prove their worth in different situations.
Yeah. I think you and John are alive because of your preparation, to be quite honest with you. I think that really was the key. And I'm sure every time you climb that mountain, you're going to be thinking about, okay, I don't really know what's going to happen to me. Just to your point, you could have broken your
Mhm.
leg. You could have been attacked by a bear. You could have
Yeah,
been struck by lightning. I mean, so many, variables out there, and you're just prepared for just about anything. And I'm sure you're going to think about that the next time that you climb that mountain or any mountain
yeah,
to make sure that you're prepared for any of those outcomes. And I think that's the key is really talking about all possible outcomes with your brothers, with your sisters, and making sure you're prepared for just about anything. And talking
hmm
about those things in advance, not waiting for that thing to happen and then figuring it out, but just say,
right.
hey, what are the possible outcomes tonight, in this social event? What could potentially happen? And let's talk about that in advance and what we're going to do before it even happens. I think that's really kind of the key.
Yep.
If you could speak directly to chapter leaders about responsibility, about safety, about looking out for one another, is there anything that you would tell them?
Just be smart about it, and like we've said, just think about, there's cause and effect. Um, Talk with people beforehand, and have a plan for when things do go bad or unexpected results. I think you can't just jump into situations anymore nowadays. There's too many variables and consequences for if you just kind of blindly run into a situation.
Mm.
Um, and just like I said a couple minutes ago, trust your executive board, trust your members. You know, um, they're there for a reason, and be a team when it comes to all of this, because you can't expect one person to do it all. I know sometimes presidents think that, I'm the president, it's my responsibility, but you got your e-board for a reason, and work as a team.
Yeah, that's really smart. You definitely have to learn how to delegate, and hopefully, this experience in your fraternity or sorority is going to help you. Because if you
Mhm.
ultimately want to create a multi-million dollar company, you can't do it by yourself. You need to depend
Right.
on other people. We're all dependent on other people. So I think the faster you learn how to delegate, I think the better. And just plan, like Scott has been talking about all throughout this interview, is really, really important. For all the NFL fans out there, you got a guy by the name of Hamlin who plays for the Buffalo Bills that literally collapsed in the middle of a game, and it was because there were EMS that was trained to deal with that situation, that he's alive today and playing for the Buffalo Bills. If not for that, he's not alive, right?
Right.
So I think, it's practice and knowing that you have a team of people and everybody on the team knows what is their role to play in that situation. And everybody's got a different role. Not everybody's doing the same thing. But if you can jump in there quickly and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing in that situation, then you can overcome just about anything because of the preparation.
Mhm.
Really, really good. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's really made me reflect on a whole bunch of things in fraternity and sorority life. And originally, when our mutual friend Alan brought this to me, it's kind of unusual, but I said, you know what? I think there's a lesson to be learned here for our fraternity and sorority members, and I think we got there. Really great stuff. The next time I happen to find myself in Flagstaff, Arizona, I like really good food. So I'm wondering, where should I go for a great bite to eat? Because I think you know where to go.
Right. And there's a ton of restaurants in Flagstaff, but thinking about this, and Mama B's has great burgers. They also have tater tots, so I think any hamburger place that sells tater tots high on my list.
Yeah.
And then Fratelli's Pizza.
Nice, nice. All right, I'm gonna hit both of those spots next time I'm in Flagstaff. I do get to Arizona every now and then. My mom happens to live there, so yeah, I'm definitely gonna
Okay.
go check that out. So I appreciate that. Really nice. Scott, what can I say, man? Incredible story. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's just really inspirational to hear how you were able to overcome all of this and help John too. I think that's just a beautiful part of the story, that you made a difference. So keep doing what you're doing. We're all proud of you, and thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah. And to our audience, if you enjoyed this conversation with Scott, if you learned something today, I want you to share this episode with your chapter. Drop a link in a group chat with all of your fraternity or sorority members. Share it on social media. You really never know who needs to hear Scott's message today. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.